The air in the lawyer's office was the temperature of forgetting, cold, sterile, and moving in a slow, silent current from a vent in the ceiling. Ella sat on a leather chair that was too big for her, its chill seeping through her thin black dress. She focused on the way the refrigerated air smelled like nothing at all, not like home, which had always smelled of her mother's baking, of laundry soap and the faint, sweet scent of wilting flowers on the windowsill, not like anything that was alive. Across the vast expanse of the polished mahogany desk, Mr. Albright cleared his throat. He was a man made of soft edges and expensive fabric, his face a careful mask of professional sympathy. Beside him sat Mark, her stepfather. Mark was not made of soft edges. He was sharp angles and impatience, his leg bouncing with a restless energy that vibrated through the floor and up into Ella's chair. He looked at his watch. Her mother had been gone for 2 weeks. The funeral was last Tuesday, a blur of casseroles and murmured condolences from people whose faces Ella barely registered. Mark had been performatively somber then, a hand on Ella's shoulder, his voice thick with a grief she knew he did not feel. Now, in the quiet of this office, the performance was over. This was business. As we've discussed, Mr. Albright began, folding his hands over a neat stack of papers, your mother's will was quite clear. In the event of her passing, her entire estate transfers to her husband, Mr. Thorne. Mark stopped bouncing his leg. He nodded, his expression serious, as if hearing this for the first time. Ella said nothing. She had known this on some level. Her mother had been sick for a long time, and Mark had been a constant, hovering presence, guiding her hand over documents, his voice a low, persuasive murmur. Ella had been a child then, just a girl reading in the corner, and then a teenager busy with school and her mother's care, and she hadn't understood the quiet rustle of those papers, the finality of the ink. The house, the savings, the portfolio, it's all consolidated, Mr. Albright continued, his gaze flicking to Ella for a fraction of a second, before returning to Mark. It was the look of a man brushing away a speck of dust. And as Ella is still a minor, Mark said, his voice taking on a tone of paternal gravity, I, as her legal guardian, am responsible for managing her affairs until her 18th birthday. Ella's birthday was in 3 weeks. The number hung in the sterile air. 18. A finish line she had once looked forward to, that now felt like the edge of a cliff. Precisely, Mr. Albright confirmed. And Mr. Thorne has decided, in order to simplify the estate and secure the most stable future, to liquidate the primary assets. Liquidate. The word sounded like drowning. I'm selling the house, Ella, Mark said, turning to her directly for the first time. His eyes were flat, like gray stones. It's too big, too many memories. Better to make a clean break. A clean break. He meant a break from her. The house was the only home she had ever known. Every notch on the doorframe marking her height, every scuff on the hardwood floor from a dropped toy, every ghost of laughter was about to be sold to strangers. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The process was brutally swift. An estate sale was scheduled for the weekend. Men came with price tags and stuck them on everything. Her mother's favorite armchair, the dining table where they'd had every birthday dinner, the worn set of encyclopedias her mother had bought 1 volume at a time. Mark allowed Ella to pack 1 box of personal keepsakes. She chose her mother's worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, a handful of faded photographs, and a small, painted bird her mother had kept on her bedside table. The rest was inventoried, priced, and laid out for strangers to pick over. Ella stayed in her room, the door locked, listening to the sounds of her life being dismantled piece by piece. The murmur of voices, the clink of glassware, the heavy tread of furniture being hauled out the front door. Each sound was a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold in the memories they were carrying away. On the final day, Mark called her downstairs. The house was an echoing shell. Dust motes danced in the empty spaces where furniture had once stood. "Everything's gone," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. He held a bank envelope. "This is for you. $500. It should be enough to get you started somewhere." Started where? She was 17, 3 weeks from 18. She had nowhere to go, no one to call. Her mother's family had disapproved of the marriage to her father, and then they had disapproved of the marriage to Mark. They had faded into a landscape of unanswered phone calls and returned Christmas cards years ago. She looked at Mark, at the man who had shared her mother's life for a decade, who had eaten at her table and pretended to be a father. She saw nothing in his face but relief. He was finally unburdened. Then Mr. Albright, who had arrived for the final paperwork, cleared his throat again. He held a single, dog-eared document, separate from the pristine stack of sales agreements. "There is one small, final matter," he said, looking uncomfortable. "An anomaly in the title searches, something that predates your mother's will. In fact, it predates her marriage to you, Mr. Thorne." Mark's expression soured. "What is it?" "It appears to be a quitclaim deed, filed 18 years ago, on the day of Ella's birth, to be precise." He slid the document across the empty floor toward Ella. It felt more like he was discarding it than presenting it. "It's from her biological father, Thomas Harmon." Ella's breath caught in her throat. Her father, a man she had never known, who existed only in a single, creased photograph her mother had kept hidden. A quiet man with kind eyes and calloused hands, her mother had once whispered. He had died in a workshop accident when Ella was just a baby. "He deeded a piece of property to her," Mr. Albright explained. "Sole ownership, in perpetuity. It was his only asset, it seems. It couldn't be touched by your mother's estate or any subsequent marital agreements." A flicker of impossible hope sparked in Ella's chest. A place, something that was hers. Mark snatched the paper before she could. He scanned it, his lip curling into a sneer. A silo? A quarter-acre of land in Black Creek Valley? That place is 100 miles from anything. He laughed, a short, ugly sound that echoed in the empty room. "I remember hearing about this. It's a worthless rust bucket. The county appraised it at $500 for tax purposes, and that was probably generous." He looked from the paper to Ella, a cruel amusement dancing in his eyes. He saw the flicker of hope there and seemed to delight in extinguishing it. "Well, I guess you have your inheritance after all," he said, the words dripping with mockery. He reached into his pocket and tossed a single, heavy, old-fashioned key onto the dusty floor in front of her. It landed with a dull clank. "Here, a key to your kingdom." The key was made of dark, heavy steel. The bow was shaped into a stylized letter, H. It wasn't a key to a kingdom. It was a key to a silo, a worthless rust bucket, a final insult. Mark and Mr. Albright left. The front door clicked shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Ella stood alone in the center of the empty house, the $500 in her pocket and the deed in her hand. She looked down at the key on the floor. It was all she had left. She bent down and picked it up. It was cold and solid in her palm. "A thing isn't ruined just because it's neglected," a voice whispered in her mind. It sounded like her mother's. She closed her fist around the key. The journey was a descent. From the suburbs with their manicured lawns and familiar streets, she took a bus that moved sluggishly through the city, then out into the sprawling, anonymous highways. The polished gleam of office buildings gave way to strip malls, then to flat, endless farmland. She watched the world she knew dissolve in the grime-streaked window. Her duffel bag held everything she owned: 2 changes of clothes, her mother's book, the photographs, the box with the painted bird, and the deed. The key was on a piece of string around her neck, tucked under her shirt, its cold weight a constant, heavy reminder against her skin. The bus sighed to a halt in a town called Oak Haven, little more than a gas station and a boarded-up diner. This was as far as it went. Black Creek Valley wasn't on the route. It wasn't on most maps. She stood by the side of the road, the duffel bag at her feet, the sun beating down on her head. Cars and trucks roared past, their drivers anonymous figures behind glass. For an hour, she felt invisible, a ghost haunting the edge of the world. Finally, a semi-truck, its engine rumbling like a tired beast, pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. The passenger door hissed open. "Need a lift?" the driver called down. He was a big man with a graying beard and a weary kindness in his eyes. She hesitated for a moment, Mark's warnings about strangers echoing in her head. Then she looked at the empty road ahead and the setting sun behind her. She had no other choice. "I'm going to Black Creek Valley," she said, her voice small. The driver grunted. "Don't go there myself, but I can get you to the turnoff. Route 7. You'll have to walk from there." She nodded and climbed in, hoisting her bag onto her lap. The cab smelled of stale coffee and diesel. It was a safe smell, a working smell. The driver's name was Dave. He didn't ask many questions. He just drove, sharing his bag of jerky and talking about the weather. The quiet companionship was a balm on her frayed nerves. He let her off where a narrow, unmarked gravel road branched off the main highway. "It's about 5 miles down that track," he said, pointing. "You sure you got somewhere to go?" "I think so," Ella said. He looked at her for a long moment, his brow furrowed with concern. Then he just nodded. "Good luck, kid." He pulled away, leaving her in a cloud of dust and a profound silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. The road was more of a suggestion than a path. Weeds grew thick and high in the center, and the gravel had been washed away in places, leaving muddy ruts. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The air grew cool. She walked. Her cheap sneakers were not meant for this kind of terrain. A blister formed on her heel. The duffel bag grew heavier with every step, its strap digging into her shoulder. The silence of the valley was immense. It was a living thing, made of the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a night bird, the hum of insects. It was a world away from the sterile quiet of the lawyer's office. After what felt like an eternity, she saw it. Set back from the road, on a slight rise, silhouetted against the darkening sky. The silo. Mark's words echoed in her mind. A worthless rust bucket. From a distance, he was right. It was a towering cylinder of corrugated metal, its surface a patchwork of angry orange rust and faded gray paint. Vines crawled up one side, clinging to the seams. The land around it was a wild tangle of overgrown grass and thorny bushes. It looked abandoned, forgotten, surrendered to the slow, relentless advance of nature. A wave of despair, cold and sharp, washed over her. She had spent the last of her hope on this journey, on the weight of the key against her chest. For what? A ruin, a metal can sitting in a field of weeds. She sank to her knees on the gravel road, the duffel bag falling beside her. The blister on her heel throbbed. Tears she had refused to shed in the empty house, in front of Mark, now burned in her eyes. She had nothing. She was nothing. Just a girl on a dirt road, with a key to a pile of junk. She stayed there for a long time, as the last of the light faded and the stars began to appear in the vast, dark sky. The cat found her there, a sleek gray shadow that emerged from the tall grass, its movements silent and fluid. It stopped a few feet away, regarded her with luminous green eyes, and gave a soft, questioning meow. It was just a stray, but it was a living thing, a presence in the overwhelming emptiness. Slowly, Ella got to her feet. She picked up her bag and limped toward the silo. The cat followed at a respectful distance. As she got closer, she started to see things the darkness had hidden. The foundation the silo sat on was a thick, perfectly smooth slab of concrete, with no cracks or chips. The rust she saw now was mostly superficial, a thin layer of oxidation on the surface of the metal. Where the paint had held, the steel beneath was sound. She ran her hand over one of the vertical seams. It wasn't bolted or riveted like a farm silo. It was welded, a clean, precise, unbroken bead of metal running from the ground to the sky. It was the work of a master. The large, roll-up door was rusted shut, but the smaller service door next to it looked solid. She approached it, her heart starting to beat a little faster. The cat sat at her feet, watching. She pulled the key from under her shirt. Her hand was trembling as she slid it into the lock. She expected it to be stiff, to fight her, but the key turned with a smooth, satisfying click. The mechanism inside moved with a well-oiled precision that defied the years of neglect. She pushed the door open. It swung inward without a sound. A wave of cool, dry air washed over her. It did not smell of rot or dampness. It smelled of cold steel, of faint, lingering machine oil, and the clean scent of dry dust. It was the smell of a place that was built to last. Section She stepped inside, into the vast, circular darkness. She pulled a small flashlight from her bag and switched it on. The narrow beam cut through the gloom. The interior was cavernous, the ceiling disappearing into the shadows high above. The floor was concrete, swept clean as if someone had just left, and against the curved wall, a spiral staircase, also made of welded steel, climbed up into the darkness. Its treads were solid. Its handrail was smooth and unbroken. This was not a ruin. This was not a pile of junk. This was a fortress. Ella stood in the center of the floor, the beam of her flashlight dancing over the perfect welds, the solid staircase, the dry, secure space. The despair that had crushed her on the road began to recede, replaced by a feeling she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Awe. The cat slipped in past her ankles and began to weave around her legs, purring, a low, rumbling sound that filled the vast, silent space. It was home. The town was called Harmony Creek. A faded sign announced its name, though the creek itself was little more than a trickle under a small stone bridge. The main street consisted of a dozen buildings, some with fresh paint, others with peeling facades that spoke of better days. There was a post office, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and at the far end, a long, low building with the words, Gus's Hardware and Supply painted in faded red letters. That was where she went. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, old-fashioned sound. The air inside was a rich tapestry of smells: sawdust, metal, oil, fertilizer, and old paper. The store was a labyrinth of crowded shelves, stocked with everything from nails and screws to canning jars and work boots. A man stood behind the counter, polishing a piece of brass with a soft cloth. He was older, with a shock of white hair and hands that were thick with calluses and stained with grease. He looked up as she entered, his blue eyes sharp and intelligent. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Ella felt a wave of uncertainty. She had a list in her head: a bucket, soap, a scrub brush, batteries for her flashlight. But her $500 had to last. It had to be a home, not just a place to sleep. That meant water, light, food. The list felt impossibly long, the money impossibly small. I just need a few things to clean with," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The man, Gus, put down the piece of brass and leaned on the counter, studying her. He didn't look at her with pity, but with a frank, assessing curiosity. His eyes drifted to the string around her neck, where the heavy steel key was now visible against her t-shirt. His expression changed. The casual curiosity sharpened into focused recognition. "That's a Harmon key," he said. It wasn't a question. Ella's hand instinctively went to the key. "How did you know?" "Thomas Harmon had his own mark," Gus said, tapping a finger on the counter. He made all his own tools, all his own hardware, forged them himself. That H, that was his signature. Haven't seen one of those in years. He squinted at her. You're not from around here. Who are you to have a key from Tom Harmon? He was my father, she said, the words feeling strange and new on her tongue. Gus stood up straight. He looked at her face, really looked, for a long moment. He saw the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw. A slow smile of recognition spread across his face. Well, I'll be. You're Sarah's girl. You've got your mother's eyes, but that stubborn chin, that's all Thomas. Someone knew him. Someone remembered him. The idea was so staggering it almost brought her to her knees. You knew him? Knew him? Gus let out a short laugh. Kid, I was his best friend. Taught him how to weld when he was just a boy, though he was better than me within a year. The man was an artist with steel. A damn genius. Gus came around the counter and led her to a pair of dusty stools in the back of the store. He poured 2 cups of thick black coffee from a dented thermos and pushed one toward her. So you got the silo, he said, gesturing with his cup. Always wondered what would happen to it. My stepfather said it was worthless, Ella said, the words tasting like ash. Gus snorted. Your stepfather is a fool. Worthless? That silo is the finest piece of construction in this entire valley. Thomas spent 10 years building it. Every panel of steel, he sourced it himself. Every weld, he did it with his own 2 hands. The foundation goes 10 feet deep. The roof is double-walled. He built that place to survive a hurricane, an earthquake, and the end of the world. He built it for you. For her. The words resonated deep in her chest. He started it the day he found out your mother was pregnant, Gus continued, his voice softening. He and Sarah, they were so in love. But her family, they were wealthy, from the city. They thought he was just some country grease monkey. They did everything they could to break them up. Gus took a slow sip of his coffee. When you were born, he went to a lawyer and had that deed drawn up. He put the silo in your name. He told me, Gus, they can take everything from me. They can take Sarah, but they can't take this. My girl will always have a place, a roof over her head that no one can take away. Ella stared into her coffee cup, the dark liquid blurring through her tears. All her life, her father had been a ghost, a half-remembered story. Now, in this dusty hardware store, he was becoming real. A man who had loved her, who had planned for her, who had built her a fortress with his own 2 hands. He was devastated when Sarah married that other guy, Gus said, his voice low. It broke something in him. He got quiet, threw himself into his work. The accident. Gus shook his head. He was the most careful man I ever knew. But a man with a broken heart gets careless. It was a stupid mistake. A grinder that kicked back. It shouldn't have happened. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The story settled around Ella, filling in the empty spaces of her past, giving shape and substance to the man in the photograph. So, Gus said, his tone shifting back to business. You're staying at the silo. Ella nodded, finding her voice. I am. All right then. He stood up. You'll need more than soap. Let's get you properly supplied. He walked her through the aisles, pulling things from the shelves. A heavy-duty generator, cans of fuel, a portable propane stove, a work light with a long extension cord, water purification tablets, a new, thick sleeping bag. The pile on the counter grew alarmingly large. I can't. I only have $500, she said, her stomach twisting with anxiety. Gus waved a dismissive hand. Thomas Harmon never sent me a bill in his life. Fixed my truck, welded my gate, sharpened every blade in this store, and never asked for a dime. Said friends don't charge friends. So you're on the Harmon account. It's got unlimited credit. He loaded everything into his old pickup truck. Come on, he said. I'll give you a ride back, and I'll show you where the wellhead is. Tom dug it himself. Probably just needs to be primed. As they drove down the gravel track, Ella felt a sense of purpose solidifying within her. The silo wasn't an inheritance. It was a trust, a legacy. Back at the silo, Gus helped her unload the supplies. He was right about the well. A heavy iron cap was hidden under a tangle of weeds. Together, they heaved it off, revealing a pipe descending into the darkness. Gus showed her how to work the manual hand pump that stood beside it. After a few minutes of strenuous, squeaking effort, a trickle of brown water sputtered out. Then it cleared, running cold and pure. Water. She had water. Before he left, Gus paused. Tom was always tinkering, hiding things. He was a man who liked secrets. Said it was the best way to keep things safe. If I were you, I'd search that place top to bottom. He left more for you than just steel and concrete. I'd bet my life on it. That night, for the first time in weeks, Ella slept soundly, curled in the thick new sleeping bag on the cold concrete floor of the ground level, with the gray cat purring by her head and the generator humming softly outside. She felt safe, protected. She was home. The next morning, armed with Gus's words and a new, powerful flashlight, she began her search. The silo was divided into 3 levels, connected by the magnificent spiral staircase. The ground floor was the largest, a vast, open circle of concrete. The second and third floors were made of thick, heavy wooden planks, forming wide, circular mezzanines that left the center of the silo open to the roof high above. She started at the top. The third level was the smallest, a narrow ring of flooring right under the domed roof. It felt like a watchtower. Dust lay thick on the floorboards. She ran her flashlight beam along the curved metal wall, examining every seam, every bolt head. It was on her third circuit that she saw it, a section of the wall where the corrugated pattern was subtly different. One of the vertical ribs was not a rib at all, but the edge of a plate. And near the floor, almost invisible, was a single, perfectly flush weld that didn't match the others. It was a hairline seam in the shape of a rectangle. Her heart hammered in her chest. She remembered Gus's words. A man who liked secrets. She ran her fingers over the seam. It was flawless. There was no handle, no hinge. How did it open? She knelt down, examining the floor right below it. Nothing. She pushed on it. It was solid steel. Frustrated, she sat back on her heels. The gray cat, who had followed her up the stairs, rubbed against her, purring. She looked from the cat to the wall, then down at the key still hanging around her neck. On a hunch, she examined the wall again, this time looking for a lock. But there was no keyhole, just smooth, solid steel. She thought about her father, a man who made his own tools, an artist. He wouldn't just use a simple lock. It would be something clever. She looked closer at the weld line. At the very corner of the rectangular seam, there was a tiny, pin-sized hole. She hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't a keyhole. It was too small. She thought about the key, the stylized H. She turned it over in her hand. The bit of the key, the part that went into the lock, was standard. But the post was hollow. She'd never noticed that before. With a trembling hand, she approached the wall again. She lined up the tip of the key's post with the tiny pinhole. It was a perfect match. She pushed. There was a soft click, like a switch being thrown deep inside the wall. The hairline seam of the rectangle widened. A hidden magnetic latch had been released. She put her fingers in the gap and pulled. A heavy steel door, a foot square, swung open on silent, concealed hinges. Inside the dark compartment sat a single object, a heavy box made of the same steel as the silo walls, with a sturdy handle on top. And on the front of the box, there was a lock that perfectly matched the key around her neck. She lifted the box out. It was heavy, dense with purpose. She carried it to the center of the floor and knelt beside it. The cat came and sat opposite her, watching with its unnervingly intelligent eyes. She slid the key into the lock on the box. It turned as smoothly as the lock on the silo door. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. If you've made it this far into Ella's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. She lifted the ledger from the box. The leather was old but supple, worn smooth at the corners. There was no title on the cover, just the faint, embossed imprint of the same stylized H that was on her key. She opened it. The first page was a dedication, written in a strong, neat, architectural script. For my daughter, Ella. So you will always know the truth, and so you will always have a place that is yours. Below it, a date, the day she was born. She turned the page. It was a blueprint, a cross-section of the silo, rendered in exquisite, hand-drawn detail. Every measurement was noted, every material specified. Foundation, 10 feet depth, 5,000 pounds per square inch concrete mix with rebar grid. Wall panels, a 36 structural steel, 1/4 inch plate, hot dip galvanized. Welds, TIG process, ER70S-2 filler rod, 100% argon shield. It was a language she didn't understand, but she felt its meaning. Precision, strength, permanence. She kept turning the pages. The ledger was a combination of things. It was a construction log, a diary, and a letter to a daughter he never got to meet. The entries were dated, spanning a decade. June 12th. Poured the foundation today. Gus helped with the mixer. He thinks I'm crazy, building something this solid out here. He doesn't understand. This isn't just a building, it's a promise, a foundation for you, little one, something the world can't shake. August 29th. First wall panel is up. The curve has to be perfect, or the whole structure will be weak. Use the slip roll I built last winter. It's slow work. Each plate takes a day to get just right. Sarah came by today. She put her hand on the steel and said it felt like the future. She's right. May 4th. The main structure is complete. Standing inside, the acoustics are incredible. Your mother sang a song in here today, and the sound filled the space, went right up to the sky. I will never forget that sound. I'm welding this memory into the walls. Ella read for hours, sitting on the dusty floor of the 3rd level as the sun moved across the sky, casting a single, sharp beam of light through a slit window that moved like a sundial across the opposite wall. She learned about the wood for the floors, sourced from a single, ancient oak that had fallen in a storm. He had milled it himself, plank by plank. She learned about the spiral staircase, how he had designed it to mimic the structure of a seashell, a shape he called nature's perfect spiral. Interspersed with the technical details were messages directly to her. A thing isn't ruined just because it's neglected. Sometimes it just needs a good cleaning, a new coat of paint, a little bit of work. People are like that too. Don't ever let anyone tell you you're ruined. They say I'm a strange man, hoarding steel and living in the middle of nowhere. They don't see what I'm building. It's not for them. It's for you. Let them talk. The work is what matters. Your mother loves you more than anything. Don't ever doubt that. The world puts people in cages, but love is a key. Remember that. The ledger was a map, a guide not just to the silo's construction, but to the mind of its creator. It was filled with diagrams for systems he had planned, but never finished. A rainwater collection system on the roof, a passive solar heating array, a dumbwaiter to move supplies between floors, and a detailed plan for the well, including the exact location of the pump and the depth of the water table. The last entry was dated a week before the accident. She's gone. They made her do it. Married him. Said they would ruin me, ruin us, if she didn't. She did it to protect me, to protect you. It feels like the whole world has gone gray. I look at this place, this fortress I built to keep you safe, and all I can think is that I couldn't keep her. I will finish it. It's the only thing I have left to give you. A place to be free." Ella closed the ledger, her hands trembling. The story she had been told, the story of a mother who left, was a lie. It was a sacrifice. The pain in her chest, the old familiar ache of abandonment, shifted, transforming into a complex tapestry of grief, of love, of a profound, shared loss. She now understood. The silo wasn't just a shelter. It was the last will and testament of a heartbroken man. It was her father's final love letter, written in steel and concrete and ink. Her path was clear. She wasn't just staying here. She wasn't just surviving. She was going to finish it. The work began. It was a physical manifestation of the purpose that now burned in her. Every task, no matter how small, was an act of communion with the father she was coming to know. It was a way of answering his letters, of honoring his legacy. She started with the basics, following the logic of the ledger: shelter, water, light, heat. The first task was cleaning. Armed with buckets, scrub brushes, and a heavy-duty cleaner from Gus's, she started on the ground floor and worked her way up. She scrubbed the concrete floors, washing away a decade of dust. She wiped down the steel walls, the cool metal seeming to gleam in response. She swept the thick wooden planks of the upper floors, their rich grain emerging from under the gray film of neglect. The work was hard, physical, and deeply satisfying. Her muscles ached, her hands were raw, but with every bucket of dirty water she tossed out the door, she felt like she was washing away the grime of her old life, the residue of Mark's greed, and the sterile helplessness of the lawyer's office. Next was water. The hand pump at the wellhead provided cold, clean water, but the ledger contained a diagram for a far more elegant solution: a small, submersible electric pump connected to a pressure tank. It would provide running water inside the silo. She showed the diagram to Gus. He nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. "Yep, that's Tom's design. Simple, efficient, bulletproof." He found her the exact pump specified in the ledger, dusty on a back shelf. "Been sitting here for 15 years. Tom bought it and never came back for it. Guess it was waiting for you." Installing it was an education. The ledger was her textbook, Gus her professor. She learned how to cut and thread pipe, how to use Teflon tape to seal the joints, how to wire the pump to the generator. The first time she opened the spigot she'd installed on the ground floor and water gushed out, clear and strong. She let out a whoop of triumph that echoed up to the domed roof. Progress. Small but real. While she worked, she began to meet the town. Or rather, the town began to meet her. Her second ally arrived in a beat-up station wagon, carrying a casserole dish. Her name was Martha, a woman with a warm, crinkled smile and eyes that had seen everything. She ran the Harmony Creek Diner. "Gus told me you were here," she said, handing Ella the dish. It was still warm, macaroni and cheese. "He said you were Thomas Harmon's girl. I knew your mother, you know." Martha became a regular visitor. She would bring food: pot roast, chicken soup, fresh-baked bread. And with the food, she brought stories. She sat with Ella on an overturned bucket, the gray cat, now officially named Thomas, winding around their legs. "Your mother and father, they used to come into the diner," Martha recalled, her eyes distant. "They'd sit in the corner booth and just look at each other. They didn't need to talk much. You could feel the love coming off them in waves. It made the whole place warmer." She told Ella about how her mother, Sarah, would drive out to the silo in her fancy car, wearing city clothes, and how she'd leave a few hours later, her dress smudged with grease, her hair a mess and a smile on her face that could light up the whole valley. "Her family never approved," Martha said with a sigh. "They thought this place, this life, was beneath her. They didn't understand that with Thomas, she was more herself than she ever was with them. That man adored her, and he was so proud of you. He came into the diner the day you were born, ordered a slice of apple pie, and just sat there grinning. Told everyone who would listen that he had a daughter, and that she was the most perfect thing in the world. These stories were like stones, building a bridge back to a past she had never known. They filled the silo with a warmth that had nothing to do with heat or light. It was the warmth of memory, of connection. Word spread. A retired plumber named Hank, a man with a limp and a perpetually grumpy expression, showed up one day. "Tom Harmon fixed my boiler one winter," he said, not looking at her. "Middle of a blizzard. Didn't charge me a cent. The ledger says you need your plumbing finished. I'll do it." For Tom. He spent 3 days running copper pipes from the pressure tank on the ground floor up to the second and third levels, installing fittings for a future kitchen and bathroom. He worked in silence, but his work was meticulous, perfect. When he was done, he just grunted, packed his tools, and left. An electrician's widow, Mrs. Gable, brought a box of old, beautiful porcelain light fixtures. "My husband always said, Tom Harmon was the only man he'd trust to wire his own house," she said. "He would have wanted you to have these." The community was rallying, not around her, not yet, but around the memory of her father. She was the inheritor of his goodwill, the steward of his good name. Each contribution, a meal, a skill, a box of old lamps, was a debt being repaid, a thread in the fabric of her father's life that was now being woven into hers. She was not alone. She was part of something. The work intensified. With running water and the promise of light, the silo began to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. The ledger guided her every move. She learned to read its language, to understand the flow of its logic. Her next big project was windows. The silo had only a few narrow slits for light, but the ledger contained a detailed plan for 3 large, circular windows on the second floor, the living area. Her father had designed them to frame the view of the valley perfectly, but cutting through 1/4-inch steel plate was not like installing a water pump. She went to Gus. "The ledger says I need a plasma cutter," she said, pointing to the diagram. Gus whistled. "That's a serious piece of equipment. Tom had one, a beauty. Don't know what happened to it after." He trailed off. "I can rent you one, but you gotta know how to use it. It'll cut through that wall like a hot knife through butter, but it'll cut through you just as easy." "The ledger has instructions," Ella said, with a confidence that surprised herself. Gus looked at the fierce determination in her eyes, the stubborn set of her chin. He saw Thomas Harmon looking back at him. He nodded slowly. "All right then, let's go over the safety protocols. Your father was a fanatic about safety. We'll do him proud." He spent an afternoon teaching her, not just how to use the tool, but how to respect it. He taught her about grounding, about amperage, about the right way to stand to avoid the shower of sparks. The next day she stood on a scaffold inside the silo, the heavy mask over her face, the plasma cutter in her hand. She took a deep breath, the filtered air hissing in her ears. She remembered her father's words from the ledger. Measure 10 times. Cut once. The steel is forgiving of patience and punishing of haste. She pressed the trigger. A brilliant, searing blue-white arc of light erupted from the tip, hissing and crackling. She touched it to the wall. The steel melted away before it, leaving a clean, molten line. Slowly, carefully, she traced the large circle her father had drawn in his plans. The noise was deafening. The light was blinding. The shower of sparks was a waterfall of fire. But through the dark lens of her mask, she saw only the line. She was steady, focused. She was her father's daughter. When the cut was complete, the huge steel circle fell away with a deafening clang, landing on the dirt outside. A perfect, round hole was left in the wall, and through it, sunlight, real, direct sunlight, poured into the silo for the first time, illuminating the space with a golden, dusty light. It was glorious. She cut 2 more windows, her movements more confident each time. Gus helped her order the custom-made round panes of thick, insulated glass, and together they installed them, sealing them against the weather. The second floor was transformed. It was no longer a dark mezzanine. It was a room with a view, a living space that looked out over the entire, beautiful valley. She stood in the center of the room, dust and sweat on her face, and watched the sunset through a window her father had designed and she had made real. The grief for her mother and the father she never knew was still there, a quiet ache in her heart. But it was now intertwined with something else, a fierce, quiet pride, a sense of belonging. She was not just finishing his work, she was building her own life from the foundation he had left her. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. A rhythm established itself. Wake with the sun, work, eat, sleep. The silo was changing, and so was she. The timid, grieving girl who had arrived on a dirt road was gone. Her body was stronger, leaner. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused and capable. Her mind was sharp, focused, absorbed in the logic of construction and the ghosts of her father's words. The redeemable antagonist arrived on a Tuesday. A dusty, beat-up sedan, its engine coughing, rattled up the gravel track. Ella watched from the second-floor window, her hand instinctively tightening around a heavy wrench she'd been using. It was her uncle, Jeff, her mother's brother. He had stood by silently while Mark had dismantled her life. He hadn't returned her one desperate phone call. He got out of the car and stared at the silo. He saw the new windows, the clean, repaired door, the wisp of smoke curling from the chimney pipe she had recently installed for a small wood stove. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished. His suit was rumpled, his face etched with a weary failure. He saw her watching from the window and looked away, ashamed. He walked to the front door and knocked softly. Ella descended the spiral staircase, the wrench still in her hand. She opened the door. "Ella," he said, his voice raspy. She said nothing. She just waited. Mark told me you came out here," he said, gesturing vaguely at the silo. "He said it was a ruin." "He was wrong," Ella said, her voice even and cold. Jeff nodded, swallowing hard. "He was wrong about a lot of things." He looked at the ground. The company he started with your mother's money, it went under. He leveraged everything, lost it all. He cut me loose. I lost my job, my house." He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I was a fool, Ella. I was weak. I was jealous of Mark, of the money. I stood by and let him do what he did to you. I was wrong. I am so sorry." The apology hung in the air between them. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the memory of his silence. But it was real. She could see that. She remembered a line from her father's journal, written after a neighbor had wronged him. A man who admits his fault has already started the repair. The weld might not be as pretty, but it can still be strong. "What do you want, Jeff?" she asked. "Work," he said, his voice cracking. "Anything. I can dig. I can carry things. I need to do something right." Ella looked past him, at the quarter-acre of land that was part of her deed. It was a choked mess of thorns and weeds. The ledger had a section for it, too. A plan for a garden, for fruit trees, a place for things to grow. "There's a patch of land that needs clearing," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "The tools are in the shed." He looked at her, his eyes flooding with a desperate relief. "Thank you, Ella. Thank you." He didn't try to come inside. He went straight to the small shed she had built, found a scythe and a pair of thick gloves, and began to work. He started at the edge of the thorny patch and began to cut, his movements clumsy at first, then settling into a steady, penitent rhythm. It was a start. The repair had begun. The confrontation she had been subconsciously preparing for happened a week later. A vehicle approached, but this one was not old and coughing. It was a brand new, obscenely large black SUV, its polished paint job a glaring intrusion in the rustic landscape. It crunched up the gravel drive with an arrogant authority. It was Mark. He got out, dressed in an expensive suit that was already gathering dust. He looked thinner, angrier. He took in the sight of the transformed silo, his eyes narrowing with a greedy, calculating light. He saw the gleaming windows, the smoke from the chimney, the neat pile of lumber for the next phase of construction. He saw value. "What the hell have you done here?" he demanded, striding toward Ella, who had come to stand in the open doorway of the silo. "I live here," she said calmly. "You live here?" He laughed, the same ugly sound she remembered from the empty house. "This is my property. I was your guardian. Any improvements you made were made on my behalf. A local realtor called me. Said the value of this land has skyrocketed because of the renovations. So I'm here to take possession." He pulled out his phone. "My lawyer is on the line. He can explain the legalities to you. This is over. You're out." Ella did not move. She did not feel the fear she had felt in the lawyer's office. That girl was gone. She was standing on her own ground now, on a foundation of concrete and truth. The silo was at her back, a silent, steel guardian. "This property was never yours, Mark," she said, her voice low and steady, carrying an authority that made him pause. "It was deeded to me on the day I was born, by my father, Thomas Harmon." "A technicality," he spat. "A worthless piece of paper for a worthless piece of junk. I will fight this in court." "You can try," Ella said, "but you'll lose. This place, this land, was his gift to me. The one thing your greed couldn't touch." She took a step forward, out of the shadow of the doorway and into the sun. "He knew men like you would exist. He wrote about it." She held up the leather ledger, which she had brought down with her the moment she saw the SUV. She opened it to a marked page. "There will always be men who see the world only in terms of what they can take, what they can own, what they can liquidate," she read, her father's words ringing out in the clear valley air. "They are hollow men, with ledger books for souls. They cannot create, so they consume. Build your walls strong, daughter. Not just of steel, but of integrity. A deed is a piece of paper, but a legacy, lived with honor, is a fortress they can never breach." Mark stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He was speechless. Just then, another sound joined the tense silence, the rumble of an old pickup truck. Gus pulled up behind Mark's SUV, blocking it in. He got out, holding a heavy tire iron, and stood beside Ella. He didn't say a word. A moment later, Hank the plumber's car pulled up. He got out and stood on her other side. Then Martha's station wagon. The small community, her community, was arriving, drawn by the sight of the strange, aggressive vehicle. They formed a silent, solid line behind her. Mark looked at Ella's calm, unyielding face. He looked at the grim, protective faces of her new family. He looked at his nephew, Jeff, who had stopped working and was watching him with an expression of pure contempt. He was outnumbered. He was outmaneuvered. He was defeated. With a strangled curse, he shoved his phone back in his pocket, wrenched open the door of his SUV, and sped away, kicking up a plume of angry dust. The dust settled. The silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the sound of victory. Martha put a hand on Ella's shoulder. "You did good, kid. Thomas would be so proud." Ella looked at the faces of the people around her. Gus's steady gaze, Martha's warm smile, Hank's grudging nod of approval. Jeff, who was walking toward them, his shoulders a little straighter. She had found her place. She had found her people. The fortress was complete. Life settled into a new, richer rhythm. The failed confrontation with Mark was a turning point. It had solidified her place, not just legally, but emotionally. The silo wasn't a refuge anymore. It was her domain. Jeff continued his work on the land. He never spoke of the past again, but his labor was a constant, silent apology. He cleared the thorns and weeds, tilled the soil, and following a diagram in the ledger, built a series of raised garden beds from reclaimed wood. Ella gave him a small stipend from the money she was beginning to earn. Her work had not gone unnoticed. A rancher from the next valley over had seen the light from her plasma cutter one night and had come to investigate. He'd been impressed by her welds. He commissioned her to repair a set of steel cattle gates. She did the work on the ground floor of the silo, which was slowly becoming the workshop her father had always intended it to be. She used his designs, his techniques, her hands moving with a confidence that felt both learned and inherited. The rancher was so pleased with the work that he paid her double what she asked and spread the word. Soon, small jobs started trickling in. A broken plowshare to be mended, a custom bracket for a tractor, a decorative sign for a neighbor's farm. It was hard work, but it was honest work. It paid for food, for fuel for the generator, for the materials she needed to continue her real project, the silo. She was her father's daughter, a Harmon, a maker and a mender in a world of users and breakers. One rainy afternoon, she decided to clean the steel lockbox that held the ledger. It had been sitting on a shelf, and she wanted to give it a place of honor. As she wiped it down, her cloth snagged on the bottom edge. She looked closer. There was a tiny, almost invisible lip along the back. It was another one of his secrets. Her heart quickened. Using the tip of a small screwdriver, she carefully pried at the edge. A false bottom, fitted with the same breathtaking precision as everything else he'd made, lifted up. Beneath it lay a single object, a flat package wrapped in waxed canvas and tied securely with twine. It was heavier than a letter should be. Her name was written on it in her father's familiar script. Ella. For when you are ready. She sat on the floor, the rain drumming a gentle rhythm on the silo's metal skin. Was she ready? She untied the twine and unfolded the stiff canvas. Inside was a thick envelope, sealed with a blob of dark red wax, stamped with his H insignia. And something else. A small velvet bag. She opened the bag first. A cascade of gold spilled into her palm. A woman's wedding band and a delicate gold chain with a single, small pearl. Her mother's. Her breath hitched. She took the envelope. Her hands were shaking as she broke the seal. Inside were several folded sheets of paper, covered in her father's handwriting, and a sheaf of official-looking documents. It was a letter. His last letter. My dearest Ella, it began. If you are reading this, it means several things. It means you have found the silo. It means you have found the ledger. And it means you are old enough to understand. It also means that I am gone, and I did not get to see you grow up. For that, I am more sorry than words can ever say. There are things the ledger does not tell you, things I could not bring myself to write there, truths that are too hard for a book of plans and numbers. Your mother. You must understand about your mother. She did not leave me. She did not stop loving me. She was saving me. Her father, your grandfather, was a powerful, ruthless man. When he found out she was pregnant with you, and that she intended to marry me, a man with nothing but his hands and a head full of plans, he threatened to destroy me, not with fists, but with lawyers and influence. He would have had my workshop condemned, my business ruined. He would have buried me in legal trouble until I had nothing. Sarah knew he would do it. So she made a deal. She would marry the man he chose for her, this Mark Thorne, if he would leave me alone. She did it to protect our future. She always planned to leave him. She was saving money, a little at a time, hiding it away. The documents in this envelope are bank statements for an account she set up in a different city. She was going to wait until you were old enough, until she had enough to start over, and we were all going to disappear together. She was coming back for us. Ella's vision blurred. She unfolded the bank statements. They showed years of small, regular deposits, adding up to a significant sum. A secret escape fund. The letter continued, but she got sick. The sickness took her before she could make her move. After she married him, I fell apart. The work was all I had left. The silo. It was my prayer for you. But my focus was gone. The grinder. It was my fault. I was tired. I was heartbroken. I got careless. I don't want you to think of it as a tragedy. I want you to think of it as the end of a love story. He will not know about the money she saved. It is in an account under her maiden name. The other document in here is a letter from her lawyer, giving you, her only child, access to it upon your 18th birthday. It is your inheritance, your mother's legacy, to go with mine. Use it to finish the silo. Use it to build your life. Use it to be free. One last thing, your mother's family. They are not bad people, just broken by pride. Her mother, your grandmother, never forgave herself for what they did to Sarah. If you ever feel the need, her address is on the back of this letter. She does not know about you. Her husband, your grandfather, told her you were given up for adoption. It was his final cruelty to her. Reaching out to her is your choice. There is no right or wrong answer. Live well, my daughter. Be strong. Be kind. And know that you were, and always will be, loved beyond measure. Your father, Thomas. Ella sat there in the quiet of the silo, the rain falling, her father's last words echoing in the vast space. The final pieces of the puzzle of her life clicked into place. The anger she had held toward her mother for leaving, the vague sadness about the father she never knew, it all dissolved, reformed by this new, devastating, beautiful truth. Her life was not the product of abandonment. It was the product of a fierce, sacrificial love. A love so strong it had spanned years of separation, and even death itself. She clutched her mother's wedding band in her hand. She looked around at the strong, curving walls of the silo, at the light pouring through the windows she had made, at the workshop where she earned her own living. This was her inheritance, not just the money, not just the building, but the story, the truth. She did not cry. The feeling was too deep, too vast for tears. It was a quiet, profound recontextualization of everything she had ever been. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was the daughter of heroes. She carefully folded the letter and put it back in the waxed canvas with the bank documents. She did not think about the money. That could wait. For now, she just sat with the truth. Later, she walked to the small creek that gave the valley its name. She found a flat, smooth stone, the way her father had described in his journal. She held it in her hand, its coolness grounding her. She didn't need to write a letter to her grandmother, not yet. Maybe never. The act of knowing was enough. She was in control of her own story now. She skipped the stone across the water. It bounced 3 times before sinking into the clear, running current. It was a release, a letting go of the old story, and an embrace of the new. The silo held. The final year of her transformation was one of creation. With the money from her mother's account, the work accelerated, but her approach didn't change. It was still methodical, still guided by the ledger, still her own hands doing the labor wherever possible. The money wasn't a shortcut, it was fuel. She hired Hank the plumber and a licensed electrician to properly finish the systems they had started. Under her direction, they installed a small, efficient bathroom on the 2nd floor and a functional kitchen against the curved wall. She chose simple, durable fixtures, a deep cast-iron sink, a stainless steel countertop that she welded and polished herself. The ground floor became a fully realized workshop. She bought the tools her father had dreamed of, a lathe, a proper welding rig, a milling machine. She organized them with the same obsessive neatness she saw in his drawings. The space hummed with a quiet, creative energy. The 3rd floor, the highest level, she made into her bedroom. She sanded the wide oak planks of the floor by hand until they were as smooth as silk, then oiled them until they glowed. She built a simple bed frame from leftover lumber. From this perch, she could look down through the open center of the silo, at the living space below, at the workshop, all the way to the concrete foundation. It was her whole world in a circle. She had a home, a business, a community. Jeff, his penance complete, had moved into a small rental in town and now worked as her assistant, managing deliveries and helping with the garden, which was now a lush, productive plot of land. Martha still brought food, not out of necessity anymore, but for the pleasure of company. Gus came by most evenings to share a coffee and talk about the day. The silo was no longer a secret. It had become a landmark. People in the valley spoke of the Harmon silo with a kind of pride. They spoke of the quiet, capable young woman who had brought it back to life, who could fix anything made of metal, whose work was as honest and strong as her father's had been. One crisp autumn evening, Ella stood on the small deck she had built off the second-floor living area. The plans for it had been in the ledger, a final, small addition. She held a warm mug of coffee, watching the sun set over the valley. The view was framed by one of the round windows, a perfect circle of orange and purple. Thomas, the gray cat, rubbed against her leg. The silo was warm, filled with the smell of wood smoke and roasting chicken. It was complete. A real house. A home. She thought of the girl who had arrived here nearly 2 years ago, lost and alone, with nothing but a key and a handful of cash. She thought of the despair she had felt looking at the rust bucket. Her father's words came back to her. A thing isn't ruined just because it's neglected. He was right. It just needed work. It just needed love. A quiet triumph settled over her. It wasn't a loud, celebratory feeling. It was a deep, peaceful satisfaction, an earned contentment that settled right into her bones. She had not only restored a building, she had restored herself. She had fulfilled her father's legacy, and in doing so, had forged her own. As dusk settled, she saw headlights on the main road, moving slowly. A car, old and unreliable, sputtered to a stop near the turnoff to her gravel track. A moment later, a figure got out, carrying a backpack. A young woman, not much older than Ella had been when she first arrived. She looked at the dark, empty road, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Ella watched her for a moment, a mirror of her own past. She saw the same fear, the same desperate solitude. Her father had built this place as a fortress for her. But a fortress could have more than one purpose. It could be a shelter for one, or it could be a beacon for many. She put down her mug, went inside, and descended the spiral staircase. She walked out the front door, leaving it open behind her, the warm light spilling out onto the driveway. She walked down the gravel track toward the road, toward the stranger in the dark. The young woman looked up, startled as Ella approached. "You need some help?" Ella asked, her voice calm and kind. The silo stood behind her, tall and strong against the twilight sky. It was no longer just a memorial to a father's love. It was a promise, a continuation. The door was open,